While I was on a video call, suddenly, there was a loud thud on the back of my head. Startled by the unexpected event, I turned around, only to find my mother-in-law standing there, with a sinister grin on her face. "As you are chatting on the computer, you must have a lot of free time. The slave should clean up quickly," she taunted. It appeared that my mother-in-law had thrown a wet rag at me. I was so taken aback that I couldn't find the words to respond. Ever since we started living together, I've been pushed around by my mother-in-law, who insists on dumping all the household chores on me, despite the fact that I am working full-time. As it's already quite challenging to handle all the housework, being harassed like this was too much to bear. With a mix of frustration and sadness welling up inside me, I felt like crying. Seeing me like that, my mother-in-law laughed loudly, happily. With the voice from the video call, "Is there anything you'd like to say before we finish?" I was able to turn the tables on my mother-in-law. As soon as my mother-in-law heard that voice, she turned pale and began to tremble uncontrollably. "My name is Raylan. I'm a 27-year-old company employee, and I got married to my husband, Silas, who is 2 years older than me, 6 months ago. Since getting married to my husband, I've been living with my mother-in-law in her home. The reason why I started living with her was that my father-in-law passed away. Just before we got married, my father-in-law had a fatal accident, which left my mother-in-law living alone in a spacious house. Perhaps my husband was worried that his mother, who is getting old, would have to live alone from now, and he suggested me, who was his fiancée at the time, that we live with her. He said, my mom has never lived alone before. At this age, living alone suddenly could be tough, and I'm concerned about what might happen to her. So, I'd like her to live with us. Is that okay?" As an only child, it might be natural for my husband to worry about his parent. So, I agreed to live with my mother-in-law. However, I couldn't understand why my husband was so worried because my mother-in-law, who is in her mid-50s, is full of energy. Ever since we started living together, my mother-in-law has been forcing me to do all the household chores, while she went out to have fun almost every day. I work full-time, and yet, she still expects me to do it all. "Make sure to do the cleaning today. Don't forget to mow the lawn, and finish it by evening. And, of course, prepare dinner." "Well, I'm off." "Wait, Tammy. I have to go to work now, so I can't do all that." "Oh, she's already gone." Of course, there's only so much housework I can manage in the limited time before heading to work. So, I'll have to finish the rest when I get back from work. That was my plan, but right after I returned home from work, my mother-in-law also came home. She noticed that not all the household chores were done, and started making snide comments. "You're not done yet? Seriously, you're so inefficient. What were you even doing all day? Don't use work as an excuse." It's frustrating to see her lecturing me when she hasn't lifted a finger to help with the housework. But arguing back only prolongs the conversation, so I stayed silent, lowering my head, and listened to her as she smugly continued with her insults. "All right, enough of this. Anyway, hurry up and make dinner. If you don't do it quickly, Silas will be back before it's ready. It's unacceptable not to have dinner ready when your husband, who is tired from working all day, comes home." Perhaps she complained enough, and eventually she left with a look of satisfaction on her face. I began preparing dinner, feeling frustrated, because the reason why the dinner would be late was because she kept on talking. As I was bossed around and received insults from my mother-in-law like this, I already started regretting to have agreed to live with her just a few months after we started living together. My husband, who is too busy working to even notice our strained relationship, is working at the company managed by my grandmother-in-law. This company was originally founded and expanded by my grandfather-in-law. After his passing, it's been run by my grandmother-in-law. She had been considering passing it on to my father-in-law for some years, since she was getting old. However, just before that could happen, my father-in-law passed away. Since my mother-in-law had never worked at this company, it wasn't possible for her to take over so my husband, who was my grandmother-in-law's grandson, became the successor in place of my father-in-law. My husband has been in training to take over the company, alongside his regular job, making him busier than the regular employees. My grandmother-in-law continues to run the company, as the president, until my husband fully learns the business, and can take over the role. She has a straightforward personality, perhaps because she has been a president for many years. She has a strong sense of morality, and often maintains a strict attitude towards herself and others. Probably because my mother-in-law was disciplined strictly by my grandmother-in-law when she married into this family, she doesn't seem to like my grandmother-in-law. She gives me a disgusted look when I just talk about my grandmother-in-law. On the other hand, I got along well with my grandmother-in-law from the beginning of our marriage, possibly because we shared similar tastes and viewpoints. Perhaps it helped that our relationship was not as complicated as that of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Over time, my grandmother-in-law and I had bonded, and, before we knew it, we were getting along so well that I would even visit her on my days off. My mother-in-law, however, didn't seem to like our camaraderie. Once she realized that I was getting along with my grandmother-in-law, she started making snide comments to me more frequently. "Raylan, it seems like you're quite close to my mother-in-law, but she is taking time out of her busy schedule to be with you. Why can't you see that you might be bothering her? You should be more considerate." It appeared that my mother-in-law's goal was to prevent me from going to my grandmother-in-law's house, and she started making me do even more chores. "I'm home. Is dinner not ready yet? It seems like the cleaning isn't finished either. You're so inefficient." As soon as my mother-in-law returned home, she glared at me and gave me insults. "I'm sorry, but I finished work, and I've just gotten home. That's why. I don't want to hear your excuses. Hurry up and make dinner." As I was working full-time, with occasional overtime, it was impossible for me to handle all the housework perfectly. I wished that I could buy ready-made dishes from the supermarket, at least on days when I had to work late, but my mother-in-law was adamant about preparing everything from scratch, saying, "I don't want to eat anything that seems bad for my health. All the food must be homemade." Frustrated with my mother-in-law's unrealistic demands, I eventually decided to discuss the matter with my husband when she was not home. "Your mother wouldn't listen to me. Can you please talk to her, Silas? It's impossible for me to handle all the housework by myself, as I have a job. I need her to help me." I pleaded, but my husband wouldn't listen to me. "I'm sorry, but I'm tired because I was busy with work. Can you complain to somebody else?" I don't think he said that because he didn't like me speaking ill of his mother. My husband, who is in the midst of apprenticeship at my grandmother-in-law's company, is given various tasks. He literally works from morning till night, and he even has to work on weekends sometimes. I didn't want to cause any inconvenience to my husband, who is very busy, so I couldn't talk to him about my mother-in-law anymore. One day, while I was spending uncomfortable days like this, I received a call from my grandmother-in-law on my day off. "I'm sorry for bothering you, Raylan, but I have some computer issues. Can you help me with that? Are you available right now? I just finished the morning chores, so I'm available. I'd be happy to help." As I had just wrapped up some household tasks, I readily agreed to help her. I switched to a video call with her and explained the steps while remotely operating her computer. "When you click this button, it takes you to this screen. Then, if you click OK here." As I demonstrated on the screen, I suddenly felt a cold impact on the back of my head. "Huh?" Startled by this unexpected sensation, I turned around abruptly. There stood my mother-in-law, with a sinister grin on her face. I looked down at my feet, wondering about an unpleasant odor, and saw a wet rag on the floor. I thought that it couldn't be, but when I touched the back of my head where I had a wet sensation, the water with the same unpleasant odor got on my hand. Apparently, my mother-in-law had thrown a wet rag at me. "As you are chatting on the computer, You must have a lot of free time. The slave should clean up quickly. Shocked by this turn of events, I couldn't find the words to respond, both to being called a slave and to having a rag thrown at me. I couldn't understand anything, including the usual harassment from my mother-in-law. Why did I have to endure this treatment? What could I have possibly done? These thoughts spun around in my head, leaving me momentarily stunned and my mind blank. My mother-in-law just looked down on me with a satisfied grin on her face and said nothing. An uncomfortable silence settled within the house. It was my grandmother-in-law's voice which broke the silence. Is there anything you'd like to add before we finish? We heard her voice from the other side of the computer screen with which I was making a video call. My mother-in-law, who seemed to have realized that it was my grandmother-in-law who I had been talking on the video call, turned pale and blood drained from her face. What? Is that voice Brenda's? You've been talking to Brenda. Even though it was a video call, it was on a remote access screen, and my grandmother-in-law's face was not on the screen. So, my mother-in-law didn't realize that I was talking with my grandmother-in-law. From the other side of the screen, my grandmother-in-law's cold voice resounded. I wasn't just listening. I don't know what you can see from there, but I can see what's happening there from my end. I watched everything, including the moment you threw a rag at Raylan. When my mother-in-law realized that my grandmother-in-law had seen all of her actions, she looked panicked with a pale face. Ignoring my mother-in-law's state, perhaps my grandmother-in-law ended the remote access, and her face appeared on the screen. Her facial expression was stern and intense like a fierce deity, and she was glaring sharply at my mother-in-law. Absolutely unbelievable. You insulted Raylan, and you even did such a terrible thing to her in front of me. What exactly were you thinking? Care to explain? No, it's not like that. This was, I just wanted to give her a warning, because she was neglecting her chores. Sweating profusely and stammering, my mother-in-law responded to my grandmother-in-law's question. My grandmother-in-law, unimpressed by my mother-in-law's response, gave her a cold-eyed stare. What nonsense! When I called, Raylan said that she had finished the morning chores. Are you saying that she lied to me? Even if she did, how do you explain about the rag you threw at her? Is that part of your discipline? And how do you explain about calling her a slave? Do you think of Raylan as a slave? Get a grip. That. Unable to provide a proper response, and intimidated by my grandmother-in-law's relentless questioning, my mother-in-law's gaze wandered. Seemingly exasperated by my mother-in-law's reaction, my grandmother-in-law let out a heavy sigh. Ugh, I've had enough. It seems I need to re-educate you. I'll be coming over shortly, so wait there. You know what will happen if you try to run away, don't you? After she said that, she ended the video call. My mother-in-law stood in front of the computer with a pale face as if in despair, and she was speechless. She looked like me earlier, when I was standing still, stunned by the harassment I had received from her. About 30 minutes later, my grandmother-in-law and my husband rushed to our house. Perhaps my husband briefly heard the situation from my grandmother-in-law on the way here, and his expression was stern. Well, let's hear your explanation for this matter, said my grandmother-in-law. My mother-in-law, who had been immobilized since the call ended, began to tremble when my grandmother-in-law confronted her. Brenda! I really didn't mean it. I wasn't bullying Raylan, or anything. I just gave her a little warning to do her chores properly, instead of playing around. Even in this situation, my mother-in-law continued making excuses, and I couldn't take it anymore. Like a pressure cooker that had built up too much steam, I shouted at my mother-in-law. For heaven's sake, could you please stop? How can you say that after you forced me to do all the housework, while you went out to have fun? It's just too much. I'm working at a company. I'm not out there having fun. There's no way I can do the level of housework you expect. Do you really think someone who works 5 days a week, from morning to night, can clean every nook and cranny of the house every single day? Even if cleaning is manageable, you also told me to prepare a full-course meal, cooked from scratch every time, mow the lawn, water the garden, do the laundry, and iron the clothes every single day. It's just impossible. I vented my frustrations towards my mother-in-law, while also conveying to my grandmother-in-law and my husband how unreasonable my mother-in-law's commands and actions had been. What? Mom, you've been making such unreasonable demands on Raylan. When you don't have a job, and you have so much time on your hands. When my husband heard my story, he questioned his mother in disbelief. My mother-in-law was totally intimidated, as my astonished husband and disapproving grandmother-in-law were glowering at her. When my husband realized that his mother would not answer anything, her turned to me and said, "It seems I've made a serious mistake all along. Raylan, I truly apologize for not listening to your words properly. I didn't realize that you've been through such a hard time. I had assumed that my mom was doing all the housework. I should have realized this sooner and intervened or done something to address it. I'm sorry." When he apologized to me, his face was pale. "You probably don't want anything to do with my mom anymore. Let's move out of her house and live just the two of us from now on." I was more surprised than happy by my husband's unexpected proposal. "Oh, are you going to be okay with that?" Did I mishear my husband's proposal? Wasn't it some sort of auditory illusion I heard because I wished so much? As I thought that, I hesitantly asked him, and he nodded vigorously and said, "Of course." He seemed genuinely committed to resolving the situation with my mother-in-law. As it was reassuring to have more allies, I felt overwhelmed with joy and tears welled up in my eyes. However, my mother-in-law, who was watching the exchange between my husband and me, didn't seem to be pleased with where our conversation was going, and she snapped back. "What the heck? Both you and Raylan are talking nonsense. Listen. It's only natural for a daughter-in-law to do all the housework perfectly. It's her duty to serve her husband's family. Moving out of my house is out of the question." My mother-in-law firmly asserted that she hadn't done anything wrong, and it was my fault for not managing the housework properly. Her sudden outburst and insistence on being right demonstrated her extreme self-centeredness. I was about to respond to my mother-in-law's outrageous claims, but before I could say anything, my grandmother-in-law said sternly, "You are the one who is talking nonsense. If you think it's only natural for a daughter-in-law to serve her husband's family, then you should be the one to lead by example and serve our household first." As soon as my grandmother-in-law said that, my mother-in-law began trembling in fear, which was completely different from her previously bold demeanor. "That's... Silas, help me. I love living with you too, because it's comfortable. Besides, your grandmother has maids, so there's nothing for me to help with. Please, tell your grandmother that I want to continue living with you and Raylan." My mother-in-law cried and clung to my husband, but he stared at her with a cold look. "Sure, living a carefree life, without doing any household work, must be comfortable. But Raylan is having a hard time in your place. I don't know how great mothers-in-law are, but why can't you consider helping out?" My mother-in-law, who was confronted with valid arguments by my husband, bit her lip and looked down in frustration. Seeing her like that, my grandmother-in-law made a decision. "Good grief. You are clinging to your child and begging him for help. Aren't you embarrassed? Fine, if you want to live with someone so badly, I'll live with you. Silas, arrange for a moving company. I'm willing to pay extra if necessary, but we need a company that can do this as soon as possible." My mother-in-law panicked, as my grandmother-in-law gave my husband instructions promptly. Please anything but that, Brenda." While my mother-in-law desperately resisted the idea of living with my grandmother-in-law. My grandmother-in-law's driver, who had been waiting in the corner of the room, dragged my mother-in-law to the car. And so, my mother-in-law was forcibly taken to my grandmother-in-law's house, with nothing else but the clothes she was wearing. "No!" My mother-in-law's screams echoed like a final cry, and continued to resonate for a long time. A few days later, the moving company which my husband had arranged transported all of my mother-in-law's belongings to my grandmother-in-law's house, and my mother-in-law officially began living with my grandmother-in-law. It seems that my mother-in-law has been strictly trained by my grandmother-in-law to do housework and company chores. "Is that all you've done? You are so slow. At this rate, it will never be finished. Do it faster. And once it's done, return home to prepare dinner. I can't do it anymore." I heard that my mother-in-law is living in exhaustion every day, as she is being pushed to her limits with various tasks by my grandmother-in-law. As a side note, my mother-in-law is a spendthrift, and had apparently used up most of my father-in-law's inheritance. Therefore, no matter how much she hates living with my grandmother-in-law, she wouldn't be able to afford to move to a new place. There was one occasion when my mother-in-law escaped from my grandmother-in-law's house and tried to sneak into my husband's family home, where we live now. However, my husband had immediately changed the locks on the family home after kicking her out of the house, so she couldn't enter with the key she had. Realizing this, my mother-in-law banged on the door and shouted, "Silas, help me! Let me in! Please hide me!" Although my mother-in-law, who was pleading at the door, was very loud, both my husband and I ignored her cries, and eventually my grandmother-in-law arrived and retrieved her. Since then, we haven't seen my mother-in-law. My husband and I started living in a spacious in-laws home, and we are living spontaneously, free from stress now that my mother-in-law is gone. Perhaps not having stress helped, and I got pregnant soon after. As we eagerly await the arrival of our child, I'm currently enjoying a peaceful life.